Welcome to another episode of Crime Secrets, where we explore the darkest corners of human behavior. Today, we delve into a chilling case from the quiet suburb of Ture, Louisiana, where a shocking affair turned deadly. A young man's life was brutally cut short in a crime that left a community in shock. This is the story of Brandon Thibideau, an 18-year-old whose life was tragically ended by a twisted affair that spiraled out of control. Brandon Thibideau was just 18 years old, full of dreams and hope for the future. He lived in Louisiana, a quiet suburb of New Orleans. Brandon was a senior at East Jefferson High School, where he excelled in both academics and auto shop. He had a real passion for cars, spending hours working on engines, dreaming of one day opening his own auto repair shop. His friends often saw him with grease-stained hands, tinkering with old cars in his driveway. Brandon lived with his grandmother, a woman who had gone blind and needed his daily care. Despite his age, Brandon took on the responsibility with maturity far beyond his years. He balanced school, a part-time job at a local garage, and caring for his grandmother without complaint. People in the neighborhood often commented on his kindness, noting how he always made time to help out anyone who needed a hand. Brandon had been dating Lee Gerard for 2 years. Lee, also 18, was a smart-driven young woman who shared his dreams of a bright future. They talked about getting married after graduation and starting a family. Brandon often saved his money to take Lay out to nice places like CFE Bull, where they would dream about their future over a nice meal. The couple was inseparable, and everyone expected them to have a long, happy life together. But beneath the surface, there was a dark secret. Brandon was having an affair with Lee's mother, Poet Gerard, a 43-year-old woman who ran a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys. Poet was attractive and successful, but she had a complicated relationship with her daughter, often competing with her for the attention of men. Brandon's affair with Poet was a secret that weighed heavily on him, and it complicated his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. Despite his dreams and plans, Brandon's life took a tragic turn. His secret affair would soon lead to a shocking and violent end, leaving the community of M stunned and his loved ones devastated by the loss of a young man who had so much potential. On the morning of August 12th, 20121 Metairie, Louisiana, was already feeling the oppressive summer heat. Around 8 o'clock, Brandon T.A.G.'s grandmother Mabel noticed something was wrong. Mabel, blind and dependent on Brandon for care, hadn't heard him moving around the house that morning. Worried, she called out to him, but there was no answer. She sensed something was off, and despite her disability, managed to dial a neighbor, Mrs. Alice Dupree, for help. Mrs. Dupree, a retired nurse who lived just 2 houses down, rushed over. She had known Brandon since he was a little boy and couldn't imagine anything being seriously wrong. But as soon as she stepped into the house, she felt a chill. The living room was eerily quiet, and there was an unusual metallic smell in the air. Mrs. Dupree called out to Brandon, but the house remained silent. She followed the scent to Brandon's bedroom as she pushed the door open. The sight before her was unimaginable. Brandon's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, practically floating in his own blood. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and his eyes were almost gouged out. The knife, still soaked in blood, was on the floor beside him. Mrs. Dupree froze in shock, her hand trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice, usually calm and reassuring, was shaky as she reported the scene to the operator. "Oh, Sheriff, there's blood everywhere," she stammered. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the modest 1-story home on West Midi Avenue. The flashing lights and the crowd of neighbors who gathered outside added to the surreal atmosphere. As the first responders entered the house, they were met with a gruesome scene that would haunt them for years. Mrs. Dupree, who had initially tried to stay calm, was now visibly shaken. Leaning on another neighbor for support, Mabel, still in her chair in the living room, kept asking what was happening, unaware of the horror just a few rooms away. The once quiet neighborhood was now the epicenter of a brutal crime, one that would leave everyone reeling. The Mitre Police Department arrived at Brandon Thibideau at home within minutes of Mrs. Dew's 911 call on the morning of August 12, 2021. Leading the investigation was Detective Michael McDell, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years on the force, known for his no-nonsense approach and dedication. Duell was a respected figure in the department. He was joined by Detective Rene Martinez, a younger, sharp-minded officer with a keen eye for detail. As they entered the house, the crime scene was immediately overwhelming. The once coy bedroom was now a gruesome sight. Blood spattered the walls and floor, creating a chaotic pattern that told the story of extreme violence and desperation. The smell of iron hung thick in the air, mixing with the oppressive heat of the August morning. Brandon's body lay crumpled on the floor, the brutality of the attack evident from the multiple stab wounds and the near gouging of his eyes. The kitchen knife used in the attack, a common but deadly weapon, was found beside him, covered in blood. Detective Duell, despite his years of experience, couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach as he surveyed the scene. He knew immediately that there wasn't a random act of violence. The ferocity of the attack suggested something deeply personal. This wasn't just a murder. Duell believed this was a crime of passion. Martinez began photographing the scene carefully, documenting every detail they collected, evidence meticulously ensuring nothing was overlooked. The knife, the blood patterns, and any fingerprints were all carefully recorded. Forensics would later analyze these to piece together the sequence of events as they worked. The detectives also noted the state of the rest of the house. The living room, where Brandon's grandmother Mabel sat, remained untouched, a stark contrast to the horror in the bedroom. This indicated that the attack was swift, catching Brandon off guard, possibly during an early morning routine outside. The neighbors had gathered, murmuring among themselves, trying to make sense of the tragedy that had struck their quiet community. Detective Duell knew the importance of acting quickly. He assigned officers to canvass the neighborhood, hoping someone might have seen or heard something unusual in a close mid-place like Metairie, where everyone knew each other. There was always the chance that someone had noticed something that could break the case wide open. The first suspect on Detective Duval's list was Poet Gerard, the mother of Brandon's girlfriend, Blee. Poet was 43 years old and had always been the center of attention in Matt's social circles. She was known for her striking looks and her successful multi-level marketing company, Beauty Buys, which sold cosmetics and skincare products. Some locals whispered that her business was a scam, but Poet dismissed the criticism, enjoying the financial rewards in the spotlight. Poet had a complicated relationship with her daughter Lee. While they appeared close friends, noticed an underlying tension between them, often stemming from Poet's jealousy of Lee's youth. And Beauty Poet had a habit of competing with her daughter for attention, especially for men. This rivalry took a dark turn when Poet began an affair with Brandon Thibideau, her daughter's boyfriend. The affair was a closely guarded secret, known only to the two, as it was the kind of secret that could destroy lives. Paula justified the relationship as a way to reclaim her lost youth, but it was clear to her that she was becoming dangerously obsessed with Brandon. When Detective Duell and Detective Martinez brought Pa in for questioning, she was visibly shaken but tried to maintain her composure. She dressed impeccably in a tailored pantsuit, her makeup flawless, but there was a nervousness in her eyes that didn't go unnoticed. The detective started with routine questions, asking about her relationship with Brandon and her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Pook claimed that she had been home alone, working late into the night on her business. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to her tone. When asked about Brandon, she described him as a beautiful boy, but downplayed their relationship, referring to him as just her daughter's boyfriend. However, as the questioning continued, her MK began to slip. When Duell pressed her about the affair, Poet's demeanor changed. She became defensive, her answers short and clipped. She denied the affair at first, but when presented with evidence of the affair, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to the affair, but she denied having anything to do with Brandon's murder. "He was my angel boy," she cried. "Ture is my witness. I would never hurt him," despite her emotional outburst. Detective Duell wasn't convinced. Her obsession with Brandon and the intense jealousy she harbored toward her daughter made her a prime suspect. The second suspect in the investigation was Lee Gerard, the 18-year-old daughter of Paul Gerard and the girlfriend of the victim, Brandon Thibideau. Lee was a bright, ambitious young woman who had just graduated high school in June of 2021. She was looking forward to starting college in the fall, with plans to study business management at the University of New Orleans. Friends and family described Lee as kind-hearted but sometimes overshadowed by her mother's dominant personality. Lee and Brandon had been dating for 2 years, and by all accounts they were deeply in love. They had even talked about getting married after Lee finished high school, a plan that had excited both of their families in a conservative southern town, where the average age of marriage is 18. However, the revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon had shattered Lee's world. The discovery of the betrayal left her heartbroken and furious, but she claimed that she was innocent of any involvement in Brandon's death. When detectives brought Lee in for questioning, she appeared emotionally drained, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt from her high school senior class. She seemed much younger than her age, almost childlike. In her grief, Detective Duwile and Detective Martinez began the interrogation, gently asking her to recount her relationship with Brandon and how she found out about the affair. Lee's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes filled with tears. She described how she had accidentally stumbled upon sexually explicit texts between her mother and Brandon a few days before his death. The discovery had led to a heated argument between her and Poet, but Lee claimed she had tried to move past it. "I loved Brandon, and I didn't want to lose him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. However, when asked about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Lee's story became less clear. She insisted that she had been at a sleepover at her friend Taylor's house, just a few blocks away from Brandon's house, but she struggled to provide details about the evening. Taylor, when questioned separately, confirmed that Lee had been there, but mentioned that Lee had left around midnight, a few hours before the estimate time of the murder. As the detectives pressed Lee further, her demeanor shifted from sadness to defensiveness. She denied any involvement in Brandon's death, but the anger in her voice was evident. "I would never hurt him," she repeated, though her hands trembled as she spoke. When shown evidence of the affair, including Poet's explicit texts sent to Brandon, Lee broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Her grief was raw, but it also raised questions. Was she crying out of loss, or was there something more she was hiding? Despite her emotional state, Lee maintained her innocence throughout the interrogation. She admitted to feeling betrayed and angry, but insisted she wasn't capable of murder. However, her unclear alibi and the intensity of her emotions left Detective DeBille with lingering doubts. The third suspect in the investigation was Richard Golly Gerard, the 47-year-old father of Lee Gerard and husband of Pogard. Richard was a successful lawyer known locally as an ambulance chaser. Due to his reputation for taking on personal injury cases, he was well known in Ture, Louisiana, for his sharp legal mind and his ability to win cases, but also for his tendency to be absent from home due to his demanding work schedule. Richard was a man who valued appearances. He took pride in maintaining a picture-perfect family image, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the troubles brewing under his own roof. While Richard was often away of the office or in court, he wasn't entirely oblivious to the tension and game of sexual ousley between Poet and Lee. He had his suspicions about Poet's behavior, particularly her inappropriate sexual interest in other men, but he chose to ignore it, hoping it would resolve itself. When the police called Richard in for questioning, he appeared composed, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie, as if preparing for a day in court. Detective Duville and Detective Martinan started the interrogation by asking Richard about his relationship with his wife and daughter. Richard described his marriage to PIA as complicated, but insisted that they had a strong bond and had sex regularly. He claimed that his relationship with Lee was also on good terms, though he admitted that they weren't as close as he would have liked. Partly due to his long work hours, the detectives then shifted the focus to Brandon Thor. Richard admitted that he liked Brandon and thought he was a good match for Lee. However, when confronted with the affair between Brandon and Poet, Richard's demeanor changed. He clenched his jaw and avoided eye contact. Clearly uncomfortable with the topic, he claimed that he was unaware of the affair until after Brandon's death, stating, If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. Immediately, the detectives pressed Richard on his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stated that he had been working late at his office, reviewing a case file for an upcoming trial. He provided the names of colleagues who could vouch for his alibi, but his tone was defensive. Richard's response to the interrogation was calm but distant, giving the impression that he was holding back. As the questioning continued, Richard maintained his innocence, insisting that he had nothing to do with Brandon's death. However, his reluctance to discuss the affair and his apparent detachment from the situation left the detectives uneasy. Was Richard truly ignorant of his wife's actions? Or was he hiding something to protect his family's reputation, despite his calm exterior? Richard's evasiveness during the interrogation raised suspicions. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was letting on. On a scorch afternoon in mid-August 2021, the police received a tip that would change the course of the investigation. It was around 3 p.m. When Detective Duval's phone rang, the caller, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed to have critical information about Polly Gerard, one of the key suspects in Brandon Favre's murder. The tipster hinted at something more sinister than just an affair, a secret that Pollitt had been hiding for years. The detectives wasted no time. They drove straight to Poet's office, located in a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of Metairie. The sign above the door read, "Beauty Buys," the name of the multi-level marketing MLN company Poet had been running for nearly a decade. From the outside, the office looked like any other small business, but inside, the detectives would uncover a shocking twist. As they entered the office, the detectives were struck by the quiet. The place was filled with beauty products, shelves lined with creams, lotions, and makeup, but there were no employees in sight. Detective Martin has noticed a locked door at the back of the office. After some persuasion, Poet's assistant, a nervous young woman in her early 20s, reluctantly handed over the key. Behind the door was Pet's private office, and what the detectives found inside was both disturbing and revealing. The walls were covered with photographs, many nude of Brandon, most of them sexually explicit and inappropriate. In one corner, there was a makeshift love shrine dedicated to him, complete with candles, trinkets, and handwritten notes. It was clear that Poet's obsession with Brandon had gone far beyond a mere affair. But that wasn't all. As the detectives searched the office, they stumbled upon a stack of documents that exposed the dark side of beauty buys. The Vanham scheme was not just a business, it was a scam that preyed on poor Southern women, many of whom were single mothers who were struggling financially. The documents revealed that Poet had been exploiting these women, convincing them to invest thousands of dollars in beauty products they couldn't sell, while forcing them to work up to 20 hours a day to pay off their debts. The financial strain had ruined hundreds of lives, leaving these women in despair. The discovery of Poet's fraudulent business practices provided a new motive for the murder. Poet's world was beginning to crumble, and the pressure of maintaining her image, combined with her obsessive love for Brandon, may have driven her to kill. With this new evidence, the police had a clearer picture of Poyard, a woman who would do anything to protect her secrets, even if it meant committing murder. The detectives knew they were closing in on the truth, but they also realized that uncovering the full extent of Poet's crimes would be no easy task. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case, or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe. True Crime Case Solvers on August 21st, 2021. The police in Metairie, Louisiana were finally ready to make their move after piecing together the evidence, including the disturbing findings at Paul Lagarde's Beauty Bu's office. They had no doubt about who was responsible for Brandon Thad's brutal murder. Paul, at 43, had become increasingly sexually obsessed with her daughter's boyfriend, leading her to commit an unthinkable crime. Paul Lagarde was known as a charismatic and successful businesswoman running a multi-level marketing NLM company called Beauty Buys, but behind her polished exterior, Poet was hiding dark secrets. The investigation revealed that she had been having an affair with Brandon for several months. When Brandon tried to end the affair to focus on his relationship with Poet's daughter Lee, Poet's obsession turned deadly. On the night of the murder, Poet confronted Brandon in the kitchen of his grandmother's house, a place Brandon had taken Pae to have sex, many times fueled by jealousy and the fear of losing control. Pae grabbed the kitchen knife and stabbed Brandon multiple times. The attack was vicious, leaving him with deep wounds and nearly gouged eyes. After the murder, Paula tried to cover her tracks, but her obsession with Brandon and her fraudulent business dealings eventually led the police straight to her. The arrest took place in the early morning hours of August 21st. The police arrived at Poet's upscale home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Just as the sun was rising, they knocked on the door, and Poet answered, still dressed in her silk pajamas, clearly not expecting visitors. The detectives calmly informed her that was under arrest for the murder of Brandon. Thibideau Poet's reaction was a mixture of shock and defiance. She tried to maintain her composure, but the police could see the panic in her eyes as Poet was handcuffed and led to the police car. Her neighbors watched in disbelief. Many of them had admired Paia for her business success, not knowing the truth behind her glamorous facade. The news of her arrest spread quickly through the community, and by the time the police car pulled away, the streets were buzzing with gossip. Back at the station, Paulette was booked and placed in a holding cell. The detectives interviewed her, but she denied everything, insisting that she was innocent. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the police were confident they had the right person. The arrest brought a sense of relief to Brandon's family, who had been living in fear and uncertainty since his death. The case was far from over, but with Poe Gerard in custody, the police were one step closer to achieving justice for Brandon Thibideau. The trial of Poe ARD for the murder of Brandon Thibideau began on November 8, 2021, at the Jefferson Parish Courthouse in Mat, Louisiana. The case had drawn significant media attention, with local news outlets like the Times-Picayune covering every detail. The courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see how the case would unfold. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Tremble, a seasoned lawyer known for his tenacity in the courtroom. Tremble, 52, had a reputation for being thorough and reliable, and this case was no exception. From the outset, he painted a damning picture of Pet as a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. He argued that Poet had brutally murdered Brandon in a fit of rage after he tried to end their affair, using the physical evidence and testimony from investigators to support his case. Tremble also exposed Poet's venal in business, Beauty Buys, as a fraudulent scheme that preyed on vulnerable women, adding to the portrait of her as a manipulative and dangerous individual. On the defense side was attorney Charles Chuck Lameau, a sharp and experienced lawyer with a history of defending high-profile clients. Lameau, 48, was known for his calm demeanor and ability to create doubt in the minds of jurors. He argued that the evidence against Payette was circumstantial and suggested that someone else, possibly Lee Gerard, could have committed the crime. Lameau also tried to humanize Poet, portraying her as a loving mother and successful businesswoman who had been unfairly targeted by the media and the prosecution. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on Brandon's family was evident. His grandmother, who had raised him, attended every session, clutching a worn photograph of Brandon. His girlfriend, Lee Gerard, sat with her father, both of them visibly shaken by the proceedings. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, especially during the testimony of the bleed detective, who detailed the gruesome nature of Brandon's injuries and the evidence linking Pet to the crime on November 22, 2021. After 2 weeks of testimony and just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Paula Gerard was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with tears of relief from Brandon's family, while Poet remained stoic, though the color drained from her face. As the words "guilty" echoed through the courtroom, the punishment was handed down on December 1, 2021. Poet was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a harsh but fitting end to a case that had shocked the community for Brandon's family. The verdict brought a sense of justice, but the pain of losing him would never fully heal. The trial had also exposed the dark side of Poet's business, leading to further investigations into Beauty Buys and his practices. The sentencing marked the end of one chapter, but left many in the community reflecting on the tragedy and its lasting impact after the trial life in Metairie, Louisiana, slowly returned to normal. But the shock of Brandon Thibideau's murder lingered in the community. The close-knit neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business was forever changed. The once bustling Girard household became quiet. Paulette Gard's life sentence left a void in the family that was hard to fill. Her husband, Richard, Golly Girard, a successful lawyer, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the scandal and loss weighed heavily on him. He continued his work, but withdrew from social circles, avoiding the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed him everywhere he went. Lyra Hallett's daughter struggled to move forward. The revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon and the brutal murder had shattered her world. She left Metairie shortly after the trial, enrolling in a college out of state to escape the painful memories. Though she tried to focus on her studies, the trauma was never far from her mind. Friends said she became more reserved, no longer the bright and ambitious girl she once was. The aftermath of the trial also had a significant impact on the broader community. Beauty Buys Poets, multi-level marketing company, came under intense scrutiny. Investigations revealed the extent of the financial and emotional damage caused by the company, leading to its eventual shutdown. Many women who had invested in the business were left in debt, their lives upended by the scam. Local news outlets like WWL-TV continued to cover the fallout, and the scandal became a cautionary tale about the dangers of predatory businesses. In the end, the trial and its aftermath left a lasting mark on everyone involved. It was a tragic reminder of how quickly lives can be torn apart and how the consequences of one person's actions can ripple through an entire community. Thank you for being with me so far in the video. If you like it, and subscribe to our channel to see more videos. Thank you all.